Hello and welcome to Self Power Now, where empowering women share their stories and advice about life, work, happiness, love, and success. I'm your host, Debbie Giussoni, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. So sit back and enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Today we are talking to Suzanne Dion. Suzanne is an expert on the Enneagram, which some of you might know as a system for personal and professional growth and development. She also teaches on the SHIFT Network and helped create the Enneagram Prison Project, which she spent several years teaching the Enneagram in California prisons. She's the co-author of the Enneagram, Relationships and Intimacy. And today we're going to talk about the Enneagram and how you can use it to improve your relationships, which we all need some help at. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you, Debbie, for having me. It's so great to be here. Thank you.
It is wonderful to see your beautiful face. For those of you who are on video on YouTube, let's just start with the basics. What exactly is the Enneagram in a nutshell, and how did you get involved into it?
Well, let me start by saying I have to take umbrage with you calling me an expert, because I tell you, the longer I study this, the more I become a student and the more I feel I have to learn. But to be here with you today to share this is very important for me, and it's very much my passion. I came at this thing called the Enneagram, which means 9-pointed diagram in Greek. Ennea means 9 and gramma means drawing. So I came upon this Enneagram completely by accident, working for an organization development firm that brought in the Enneagram to work with CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And I'd never heard of it, but I started designing the PowerPoints for the big lectures that we were going to be doing. And I met a man named Dr. David Daniels, who was brought in to work with the CEOs along with the head of this organization. I thought, what is this? And I was in the middle of a really treacherous divorce at the time, and I was pretty shaken up. And I sat in and listened to the lecture, and Dr. David Daniels, who was professor emeritus at Stanford University, who actually brought the Enneagram to Stanford, he believed in it so much. He actually stood up in front of these CEOs and he said, "Where your attention goes, your energy will follow." I didn't understand what that meant. And then he said, "When you study the Enneagram, it will completely change your compassion for your fellow human being." And he had tears in his eyes in front of these CEOs, and I thought, what on earth is he talking about? But obviously he was so passionate about it. By the end of the workshop, I had taken copious notes. Like I said, I was in the middle of this divorce. So many things were kind of resonating for me. And I ended up going on to train in his organization, which at that time was called the Enneagram Professional Training Program. And I ended up certifying as a teacher. I had no intention of using the Enneagram for anything but to heal from this divorce and find out who I was. But I ended up learning it so deeply and falling so in love with the work that it was doing to heal my own soul and get myself acquainted with myself, that I couldn't keep it a secret. And I started working with Dr. David Daniels in his conferences. His organization was holding Enneagram conferences for people that were pursuing Enneagram certifications as teachers and practitioners and coaches. And then I went on from that to joining forces with an incredible woman named Susan Olesic and her husband, Rick. And at that time was one of the founding board members when Susan founded Enneagram Prison Project. And we started bringing the Enneagram into prisons and jails in California. And David Daniels was on our advisory panel. So that's how I got into this. Fast forward to co-writing the book with David Daniels at the end of his life. He wanted to leave a book in the world about how the Enneagram could literally change, save, and enhance our relational experiences with one another. And now I'm pretty much, my whole career is passionately involved in teaching, educating, coaching, and working with individuals, couples.
And it all started with that one lecture.
It all
Well,
starts with energy follows attention. What is that? Yeah.
well, also too, they say that, information comes to you exactly when you need it in your life, like a book falls off a shelf or a person introduces you to something that helps you. And in your case, it was the Enneagram and being introduced to that. Tell us a little bit about the 9 numbers. And I kind of laughed when you said, the more you learn, the more you have to learn about the Enneagram, because I've had some experience with it with some friends who also practice. And I feel like the more I know about it, it gets more and more confusing to me. So just from the basics, give us some examples of what those 9 numbers, or even just a few of those numbers, mean, and a couple of the types, and how they show up in, whether it's in our personality or in the world, or how they help us get things done or don't, or handle stress.
Yeah. So you just nailed all the critical parts of it. So let me just give people a base background, because I tell you, I'm not fond of the name, because it kind of sounds like candygram or mammogram, and even begin.
And it's really hard to spell. Really, really hard to spell.
It doesn't do justice to the amount of ancient wisdom, plus modern understanding of neurobiology, and understanding of actually our spirituality as well. But the Enneagram really is a system of temperaments. It actually helps us to understand personality, how it is formed, and how lots of it is actually inherent. So this whole conversation between nature and nurture, well, actually, there's a lot of nature going on. And the nature piece is kind of our blueprint, our DNA, our ancestral, makeup that gets passed into us, mixed with what happens with each one of us in utero with mom. And also something, let's call it spirit, let's call it divine spark, let's call it life, let's call it soul, that infuses us and animates us into a life form. But by the time you meet your parents, at the moment you're born, something's already wired up. You're not a blank slate. They used to think we were a completely blank slate. Well, ask any person who's got more than one child, and they'll tell you that they were different from the beginning. They had different needs. They cried differently. They cried over different things. And this is temperament. And basically, the Enneagram begins by letting us know that we have a temperament, what we call in the Enneagram type structure, your Enneagram type structure. And what that really is pointing at is the fact that your central nervous system has proclivities and propensities already laid in, strengths and aptitudes that you're going to organize around in order to form solutions to threat, form a solution to your need not being met, form a solution to frustration, form a solution to shame, form a solution to negligence. So your temperament, your Enneagram structure, is what's organizing solutions to deal with the environment that you landed in. So basically, when we say, is it nature, is it nurture? Well, it's actually a combination of both. We've got a temperament, we've got some kind of nature that comes in with us, which we're calling Enneagram type structure. And then that structure gets shaped by the environment. We are born unfinished. There's no doubt about it. But
thankfully so.
Yeah, there's a lot of, shaping going on, but something's getting shaped. And that's what the type structure is pointing at. That's what the temperament's pointing at. One of us expresses our anger full out like a flood of fireball energy, and other people express their anger by it actually just shuts down and they get really quiet. Neither one of us decided that consciously as a child. The body decided all that for me. Was I going to express my anger? Was I going to go quiet? Was I going to be big and exuberant? Was I going to be smaller and an observer? This is all in the body already. And this is why siblings can be so different from one another, born to the same two parents in the same family.
Right. And within each of those numbers, within each of those temperaments, there's this range, right?
Yeah.
So from my experience, you have, if you've done a lot of work, or if you recognize some things, you can correct them about your behavior, or become a better person. So you've got this range of sometimes very negative characteristics of each of those ranges all the way to like the best characteristic of those ranges.
Yeah.
So I've been told by some Enneagram experts that, and taking the tests and whatnot, that I'm primarily a number 3. Let's just look at a number 3 just to give people an idea of, okay, what do you have to work on if you're a number 3? How can, what is your best self if you're a number 3?
Yeah. So, and what you're pointing at is that there's 9 of these temperaments,
Right.
and we've got 3 of them in what's called the head center of intelligence, where you dominate with kind of the cognitive faculty. 3 of these Enneagram types are in the heart center of intelligence, where you've got to dominate with the approval, validation, and experience of other as it relates to you. And then we have a gut center of intelligence, is pretty much kind of my boundaries, my autonomy, and my dignity. And so 3 Enneagram types are in the gut center. So 3 centers of intelligence, and 9 total types. So now you're talking about type 3. Type 3 is in the heart center of intelligence, meaning that it has a really strong aptitude toward, how am I coming across? How am I being read? Am I being approved of? How am I being validated? What do I need to do to get validation here? How do I need to shine? What do I need to do to win? So 3s are called the achiever, the performer. They are highly oriented around success. And I must have value by doing and accomplishing. And here's the kick: in the eyes of others. The validation is external. So it's kind of like energy leaves a type 3, it leaves the type 3, and it goes out to others. And then the validation comes back in the eyes of others. The 3 registers where it's at and who it is. So it's an other referencing type structure, and it's very sensitive to how it's being received. And 3s have got an incredible talent. I like to say 3s have a lot of what's called mirror neurons. Like 3s can read a face, read if they're coming across well or not coming across well, like just right away, and can shift in the moment. So there's an aptitude. And the way I like to work with the Enneagram is to understand that each one of these temperaments comes imbued with aptitudes and gifts. There's a propensity towards something that's a strength. 3s have a high sensitivity to the environment, a high sensitivity to others. Now imagine in sales and in acting and in theater, and can you imagine how effective a 3 would be, being able to read your target client, being able to read an audience, being able to please the director, because you can shift on a dime. So this is some of the aptitude of type 3. So actually 2s, 3s, and 4s, they're all in the heart center of intelligence. And they're all very sensitive to other. How am I coming across? What kind of connection am I getting? Am I being validated, approved of? Am I being accepted?
Right.
Am I wanted? Am I desired? That's all in the heart. This is, all of us have this intelligence, right? Because if we're not tuned into others, and if others don't approve of us, guess what happens to us? We get thrown from the tribe and eaten by a tiger. So we have to have the intelligence that keeps us connected and registering what's acceptable and not acceptable, what causes me to stand out and be loved, and what causes me to be ostracized and shamed. So the heart is registering how this feels all the time.
And there's not only, you do have a main number, but then you also have, what is it called? Wings? Is that you also have other influences, and I can't remember what mine were. I think 7 was one, maybe 9 or something like that. But it gets much more complicated than that. And then, of course, if you get obsessive, if you're an obsessive 3, that might not be a good thing to be as well, right? Depending on your profession or whatnot. So it does matter to go in depth and find out, okay, what are the characteristics? But again, that's your nature, but you could still sort of change. You can improve, you can recognize some of the downsides of some of the personality traits and improve yourself, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the first benefits of studying the Enneagram is realizing why I do what I do, why I have an impulse, or why I have a sensitivity around something, why that's different from my partner. And as a matter of fact, there's 9 different ways of being in the world. There's 9 different kinds of propensities and aptitudes. And every single one of these 9 temperaments brings a gift to the collective tribe, to the collective humanity, meaning we're all contributing to the survival of species. So if you take one of these temperaments out, the whole thing starts to limp along, right? All part of a really necessary and contributing whole. So when you're sitting there with your partner, your husband, like, what is wrong with you? Why don't you see it the way I see it? Why do you get mad? That would never upset me. Well, because they're wired differently. And so the first thing that learning this helps us to understand is first compassion for self and other. Oh, that's why when I get angry, I can't talk. I have a client right now, and he's a very, very outspoken, directed Enneagram type. And he married a very withdrawn type. And they would get in an argument, and he would be, talk to me. What are you thinking? And she'd be like, I don't know. I can't think. So, and he would like, you don't love me, do you? Otherwise you'd talk. And actually what's happening is not that she doesn't love him, it's that she's in a freeze response where her temperament locks up and shuts down. And as she's scrambling to find the words, but her temperament is actually numbing her out, now she's in a panic because she can't give this person what this person needs. And this poor man on the other side is feeling, if she loved me, she'd say something. So just by not understanding their 2 Enneagram types, the 2 of them feel completely bombarded, not loved, not felt, and not safe.
Well, this is a great segue into your book, The Enneagram and Relationships, and why people get along and why they don't get along. And like you said, many times opposites attract. So what's the first step? You have to find out what your type is and what your partner's type is, correct?
So you start, remember, we have 3 centers of intelligence, and everybody has brain tissue in their head. The heart has brain tissue and its own central nervous system, by the way. And the gut also contains a brain-like tissue in the gut, which is also what controls our immune system. Think about how smart the immune system is, right? Has to know what to boundary and what to let in all the time. So we all have 3 centers of intelligence, but one center has got a lot of our aptitude, kind of our driving gifts. So the first thing we do is to kind of figure out what center of intelligence we're in. And then we land on our accurate Enneagram type. So for instance, type 8, 9, and 1 is in the gut center of intelligence, my dignity, my autonomy, my free will. And anger is actually a driving survival emotion in the gut center. Then we have the heart center of intelligence, type 2, type 3, and type 4. Panic and distress, grief, sadness, and utter, like a hysterical reaction when loss of contact happens. So you can, for those people with babies out there, there's a cry of your child after they're diapered, after they're full. It's this cry for contact.
I think one of my puppies has that.
Absolutely, because puppies are mammals, and these what I'm talking about right now is shared by all mammals. There's a panic and distress at the loss of contact, loss of attention, the loss of the gaze. So the 3 heart center intelligences are very sensitive to this. And then we have the head center of intelligence, which kind of organizes around what's called object permanency and certainty, reliability, and thinking into the future and getting prepared, and a lot of cognitive processes to keep me safe, to make life not dangerous, to make it consistent and something I can trust and rely on. So the head center is doing all of this work. So 3 centers of intelligence and 3 different types, 5, 6, and 7 are up in the head. So you find, gosh, I seem to be oriented around anger, gut center of intelligence, panic and distress in the heart, loss of contact, loss of attention, loss of the gaze. The head center is fear. We're the only mammal that can scare ourselves to death sitting in a chair through imagination. We don't think the animal world and the animal kingdom is actually scaring themselves using cognitive processes, but we have this ability to shoot into the future and imagine,
or live in the past, right?
Or we move into the past
and
ruminate. And when we go in the future, a lot of the times we're either thinking about a new possibility, a new option, a new choice, a new something great, or we're going into the future thinking about what could possibly go wrong, how to prevent it, and how to double back and prepare myself now. Or we're going up into our mind and using the future to figure things out and to get ahead of the game and to find power through analysis, through problem solving.
Well, any spiritual practice will tell you to get out of your mind, right? And not live in the past or the future, but live in the present.
Yeah,
with gratitude and love and compassion.
And to be present takes a lot of practice, because how much presence can we actually tolerate before a lot of different things starts to surface? Anxiety, or the not feeling safe in childhood starts to bubble up, or the resentment from that conversation I had yesterday starts bubbling up, or the argument I had with my mom 8 years ago that never got resolved. Like, all this is in the body, right? It's all moving around. And so when we get still, this stuff starts to come up, and until we learn how to tolerate it, because it's painful, we'll avoid the present moment and we'll get busy with something else. And that's something that we really do work with in the Enneagram, because different Enneagram types tend to get preoccupied with similar things.
Are there any numbers? Are there any numbers that should not be coupled together as partners?
Oh, it's such a great question. So let's talk about that. So we've got 9 temperaments, 3 centers of intelligence, and opposites do tend to attract. You're absolutely right. But think about nature, how smart she is, right? She puts people together with opposite talents so you can better survive, right? So you bring 2 different things to the table for survival. But what happens is we might be drawn to those 2 different things that make us different. But then after, 2 or 3 or 4 years, and you're in relationship with someone, you're not enamored anymore, but you're actually starting to deal with how their differences are causing strife, and that what's wrong with you, and why don't you see it the way I see it? And we're also, after that much time, starting to deal with our defense system, right? The way we're protecting my way of being in the world, and it's different than your way, and your way's wrong and my way's right. And then we start, this is what happens. So the first way to get along is to start to know ourselves. So we always get this question, what type should be with what type? And the more someone understands themselves, the more they can get along with all types. So the more healthy, like self-aware, healthy we are, we get along better. Now, that said, there's no doubt that certain types tend to migrate to certain types just when they're being a total unaware type. So you'll often see a head type, type 5, who gets married to a heart type, type 2. And the type 2 is meeting all the needs of the type 5, who spends a lot of time in his head. Sometimes he forgets to eat, sometimes he forgets to, and the type 2 is kind of taking care of him all the time. You often see Enneagram type 6, who is the troubleshooter, the devil's advocate. They're the ones that use their mind to go into the future, see what could go wrong, and then double back and start preparing. You often see Enneagram type 6 with what's called an Enneagram type 9. Type 9 is a kind of laid back, the moment is now, I'll worry about it tomorrow. So you can see how this couple, the 6, is doing all the anticipatory worry, and the 9 is kind of bringing in the good dinner and the let's watch a movie, and brings more comfort into the relationship.
So what do you do in that situation? How do you have a long-term relationship without really irritating each other?
Well, I tell you, until we get to know ourselves, and we really start to understand that a different temperament is actually wired differently, it is really hard to get along. And we do find ourselves attacking one another for those differences. And those differences are really critical to our survival. So studying the Enneagram, this is why I love the Enneagram so much for coupleship, is that once you realize that you have a different temperament that has a different gift, one person is preventing all the things that could happen in the future, and the other person is really geared to kind of like taking care of things today and making things more comfortable. So you start to realize, wow, we're really different. The second thing is we have different capacities. and this is the other thing we get in trouble with in relationships, is that, so for instance, I'm a type 1 on the Enneagram. Type 1 is the crusader, reformer, perfectionist. So
Mm-hmm.
believe me, it's not that type 1s are perfect. I can't get to perfect. So what it is, I'm so irritated how far I'm always am from perfect, and how it has to be more perfect. And I keep trying to beat that drum and get there. But what happens with this Enneagram type is that there's little capacity for serenity. There's little capacity for
Because you're always trying to get to that next level, right?
there's always more to improve. So
Yeah.
it's like, it's hard to let something go when I'm creative. It's like, I always be better. And then I've got my partner that comes in and it's like, hey, let's just drop everything and go to the beach.
So that's probably a good yin yang balance, right? To have that. Otherwise, because if you were with someone that was a 1, that would be really difficult.
What would happen to me? We would be both working constantly. We would never see each other, and we would never be spontaneous. So, you're right. My attraction to someone who brings adventure and gives me permission to let go of this grip is hugely important to my health. Now, what'll happen if I'm not aware of this is they come in and say, hey, let's go to the beach. And I'm like, ugh. And I scowl and I get all this
like, how could you be thinking about going to the beach? I have so much to do.
Yeah. And I start to get frustrated, and then I don't want them to know that. And I'm like, my mouth gets tight. And I'm like, really? You want to go to the beach? And so if I don't know that I'm a type 1, and let's say this is a type 7 is in the head, and they use the anticipation, the future tripping, to imagine positive options. Let's go here next. Let's go there next. High stimulation type, right?
Yes.
Perfect for a type 1. But if we don't know that we're different, that 7 is going to get so bogged down with not getting the 1 out of their cave. And the 1 is going to feel so pushed and frustrated that the 7 doesn't take them seriously, and is always trying to get them away from, I have so much to do. That creates nothing but stress. So if I do go to the beach without being aware of my type 1ness, I'm sitting there like this. I'm still stressed out.
You're not having fun.
No, and because I'm thinking about how far behind I'm falling, and the time is going, and it's like, so the understanding of our differences, how we are looking to the other to give us permission, then we make them wrong for that. So this is so much of the dynamic that happens between couples that creates a lot of stress. And we go from being so excited about the other person's different qualities to actually making them wrong for it.
And it goes back to some general principles of communication and relationships as well. And that is, acceptance, right? Acceptance and tolerance of other people's differences. And you mentioned this in the beginning. I love this, is compassion, right? Compassion for how other people perceive things, how they think, how their way of being is, even if it's not the same way of being that you operate in the world.
Yeah, and that compassion and your word acceptance, and to kind of enter into those kind of higher frequency ways of being. Now we have to start working with capacity. So for instance, my client I was telling you about, who, say something. Say something. Don't you? So as she's getting quieter and he's getting more aggressive, right? To shift our interpretation of what's happening and use the resource of compassion. So, and in starting to work with this client, instead of seeing the more quiet she is, the more it means she doesn't love me. Well, what if the more quiet she gets, the more her central nervous system is shutting down on her? Actually, she still loves you. So now it's like, oh, because he can't even imagine what it feels like to have a nervous system shut down on you, because he's explosive. He's an explosive type. He can't shut it down. It comes up and out at just woo, voluntarily. And for her, it takes a long time to get rid of that contraction. So to gain the capacity to hold whatever your pain is, it's really really hard because the body can only hold so much pain, and then it hits its overwhelm and it can't anymore. And that's when we like run out the door, slam, I'm in my car, you know, and then we start screaming or we throw something, or that's the moment of overwhelm. Or for a type that disengages, they completely shut down. Their head goes into a fog. They can't talk. That really happens. So to gain capacity to where you can be with that lockdown and stay present to it, or for him, he's got this volcano of rage coming up. He believes he's not loved and he wants to shake her, right? For him to pause.
It's like the shaking baby thing. It just reminds me of the shaking baby thing. Like,
this is
stop crying.
And if we've got a mantra going, she's quiet because she doesn't love me, that rage is going to fly, is going to escalate, right? And so in that moment, to pause takes tremendous physical, it's called somatic capacity. And until we develop capacity, it isn't there. I can't hold it. I can't speak. And compassion for the capacity of one another, I have found one of the greatest gifts of the Enneagram is to realize that people aren't withholding on purpose. They're not screaming on purpose. They've hit an overwhelm point, and that's as far as the body could hold them. And now the defense system is in full force. And once you get a defense system, two defense systems can't communicate at all because they have no awareness of other. It's only to save my soul. It's only to save my sense of self, and it can't receive anymore.
Right, because then you're at war, right? You know, it just reminded me when you said two defense systems. I mean, you're at war all the time then. So you have to take that step back and say, okay, what is this about? How can I see this in this other person's viewpoint, right?
Debbie, that's what your teaching is so powerful, because you teach people to do that step back piece. And that moment when we step back, there's a new capacity that's just come in.
Yeah, we're also used to reacting, right? Reacting, no matter what type you are, right? Reacting the way you normally react.
Yes.
But all of that can change, right? You can change how you react or not. You can change how you view other people or not. That's all that capacity that, okay, maybe I was born this way, you know, with this kind of personality, but I could get the best out of that personality.
Changing how we react changes our life. Changing the automatic impulse / compulsion. Changing the compulsion to react in a certain way and get triggered in a certain way. This is what changes our life. But we've got to build the capacity in this somatic experience, my body. Some people have too much anxiety coming up. It's like they get to a certain point where they can't contain it, right? They either feel like they're going to pass out or they got to run. So
panic attack time.
That's really real, right? It's all caused by the stress hormones in the body.
Well, we've been talking about maybe numbers that are difficult to get along, right? Sometimes they're opposites, and sometimes it's because they're the same. Are there any combination you've seen in your long career that are really good together? What numbers are really good together?
Okay, so let's base this in. Let's say these two people know nothing about the Enneagram. They don't know anything about their temperament. They're in a natural level of defense for a Western individual, and they come together. You know, I see 3s and 6s do pretty well. I see 7s and 1s do pretty well. I see 4s and 1s a lot. 2 and 5 a lot. 2 8s tend to like each other, but it will get very explosive. You know, type 8 is in the gut center of intelligence. It's that person that's got that great big energy, and they walk into the room and everybody knows it. Type 8 is called the challenger, the boss, the leader. They're direct. They keep it simple. Give it to me straight. Truth is everything. I got your back. You got mine. So they're all about trust and justice and what's right and what's wrong. And they tend to be leaders oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
And they like it. They like to have things served up straight. So when they meet another 8, they're like, yes. So they, yeah, they're
They
both,
get they get it.
they get it. They get it. And they don't scare each other because 8s have a very big presence and they can become very intimidating. They wield their anger freely. They'll confront you. They don't care who's in the room. If it's time to confront you, they'll confront you. So they're fearless. So when they meet another 8, they get somebody else there that's going to meet them in that energy and not be intimidated by them. So that's very refreshing for them.
And
You'll
it's
often
easy.
see
It's an easy relationship to have.
it's easy for
Yeah.
them. It will be explosive and they'll have the big fights. Like they'll have those big fights, but they'll also get over it too in ways that some of the other types will hold on. They'll grieve. They'll get resentful. You know, other Enneagram types don't shake it off quite as readily as 8s can.
Right. We've all known people that have that kind of explosive relationship. And some of us might look at that and say, how could they fight all the time and still get along? But you're right, because if it's if that's their kind of innate way of being and they like that, then hey, more power to them, right?
Yeah, and it really tends to work for them. I have a couple right now who's a 5, a head type, who's up figuring things out, very esoteric, doesn't tend to trust the information out here, is going to solve it in here. So that's kind of the 5. Married to an Enneagram type 6, who actually, it's all about the information out here and preparing for the worst and anticipating what could go wrong. And so they've got a lot of head cognitive reasoning, future negative, actually future prevention energy in their marriage. But of course, there's no heart type here and there's no gut type. So they get caught in the same kind of fear together. They get caught in kind of over analyzing things together. So that's one combination that's kind of interesting. I mean, you'll see people get together all over the place, but you'll often see people more along the lines of the diagram. So we didn't talk about the symbol of the Enneagram, but the 9-pointed drawing, it's actually a sacred geometric symbol. And you'll see a circle, and then you'll have the Enneagram types going around the circle 1 through 9. And those lines that connect all the types, they mean something. So you'll often see people getting together on the line. So
right.
7, and a 3 has a line to 6, and an 8 has a line to 2. You see a lot of type 8, big gut energy, getting together with a type 2, big heart energy, who takes care of your needs. So the 2 takes care of the 8 and allows the 8 to be a little bit more vulnerable.
Yeah, which again is another one of the complexities of the system, the lines, the connecting lines. Now, when we've been talking about romantic relationships, there's, we have relationships in all kinds of areas, from family to colleagues. And when you were first introduced to the Enneagram, it was in a work situation. And a lot of companies do use the Enneagram as a tool to evaluate people's personality and how they can best serve them, how they can best help them be successful, especially in sales, in a sales kind of role or managerial role. In areas like family, and whether it's, a parent-child or a sibling or whatnot, you don't really choose that. You don't choose that relationship like a partnership. You can't walk away from that. What is your best advice when you have challenges in those sorts of relationships? For example, a mother and a child.
So this is a fabulous question. And so let's just go back to the recognition of different temperaments. And I'm actually part of a project right now to bring the Enneagram very specifically to parenting. So we all hear about trauma, right? Childhood trauma. Nobody comes out of childhood unscathed. There's no way a human can meet all of them.
I always say every household is dysfunctional. When young people say, "Oh, my household was so dysfunctional," I'm like, Yeah, everybody's was. It's to
Right.
some degree, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a faulty model having humans
Yeah,
raising humans, because we've got all this generational stuff that's being passed down. We've got
exactly.
war, and so each family absolutely has its own level of dysfunction, and you've got each parent will have their own Enneagram type, their own temperament, and then the children will each have their own temperament. Now, as is nature, the beauty of nature, the constellation of the children will often be kind of varied. You'll get different types in the children. So this for the safety and the survival of the family, we've got different gifts coming in with the children. So
Hmm.
I had one person say to me, "Yeah, I've got 5 brothers and sisters, and we're all nines." And I'm like, impossible.
Can't be.
Because nature wouldn't do that. And so we've got a lot of misreading in that family per se, but we also, type 9 is a type that's be seen and not heard. It stays invisible, stays real quiet, doesn't want to get in trouble, is pleasing others. So of course, oftentimes we have parenting styles that force children into that kind of adaptive strategy,
Mm.
where now we have a family where they all think they're nines because they've all been forced to suppress the self. That's a whole nother story. But in parenting, one of the most critical things to recognize is that my child is going to quite possibly have a different temperament than me. And another child might have a temperament that I like more than this child. So if you've seen in families, you get mom really gels with sister number 1 and absolutely doesn't get along with sister number 4.
Mm.
Wow, this is pretty significant. So our temperaments will naturally kind of share perspectives, or share the way we work with anger, or share the way we flow more than another type. And what happens with parenting, which can cause a lot of trauma in the system of self and the way the self-esteem organizes, is when a parent doesn't like us or does not like our natural temperament. So, for example, I've got a type 8 mother. So she's a big, exuberant, let's get out there and play football and get out in nature. And she's taking them on hikes. And she actually has a type 5 little boy. Type 5 little boy wants to spend all the time in his head figuring things out, in his imagination, dreaming of the cosmos, looking at astronomy, reading books, putting together models. He doesn't want to be out playing football. And he tends to be maybe not as muscular, maybe more slight in figure, because he's more of a cerebral kid that's not quite as active. Well, guess what? Mom doesn't like that. I can't have a boy like that. What's wrong with
Mm.
you? You need to get outside, get outside, get outside. What's wrong
So
with
again, it comes down to acceptance, right?
you? Yeah,
And compassion.
big time acceptance. And we
Yeah.
don't realize that when we're not aware of our own temperament, and oftentimes we're going to want to try to pass our temperament on to the child.
Mm.
I never get
And the
angry.
child feels that. The child feels like you just want me to be like you.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Or you want me to be like sister so and so. I'm not like her. So the non-acceptance of the child's natural essence qualities can cause a lot of system of self damage. And this is
Mm.
happening every single day all over the United States, in beautiful parents trying to do their best parenting and have no idea that they're damaging a child. Not a clue.
Mm.
That makes sense. So
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it also speaks to why parents treat their children differently and why you sort of have to, right?
you really need to parent to the child, not have the child fit what's convenient for you, what you really want from the child, or what you want the child to be. We've got to call it attuned parenting. We have to parent to the temperament and to the specific needs of the child. So for instance, some children, heart type children, they're sensitive to the gaze, to attention, to connection, to feeling bonded to you. And, they're sensitive. They might cry more. And so that if let's say you're a head type and you grew up in a family where your feelings were not honored or valued, you also happen to be a head type. So you have more resource to not dwell in your feelings as much. But if you're in a family where you're not allowed to cry in your heart type, let's say you're a type 4, and so here's a little boy, type 4, true story, finds a little dead birdie on the road, okay, bird, and he's just crying. This little bird, it's dead, and this is a type 4. Type 4s are the individualists, they're the romantics. Famous type 4s will say, why is the whole world not crying? Because type 4s they feel the suffering of everything. They tend to be very empathic. They feel people's sorrow. They feel people's pain. So here he is with this little bird. Dad sees him. Boys don't cry. Dad doesn't know he's got a little 4 here, little Enneagram type 4, who's very artistic, very dreamy, very ethereal. Another little type 4 that I know was his father took him out, put him in football, came to pick him up after the first day of football, and he said to the coach, where's my kid? Where's my kid? And they're looking around the field. The kid's off with the butterfly, chasing a butterfly. All the other boys are over here tackling. Type 4 boy. So, yeah. So, the answer to that is you sit down next to this little boy with his bird in his hand and say, son, why are you crying? Tell me about that. What are you feeling? And then he'll explain it. And then you can soothe the child. And that's how you reinforce that child's temperament, rather than, what the hell are you crying about? You can't cry, you're a boy. And then to have them negate their essential self. So you're absolutely right. And you might have a sensitive little 4 boy in your family, and you also might have a type 8 boy. And these two brothers are very different. They need different things. They need different kinds of attention. They need different kinds of conversation. So to be able to expand our own temperament, to accept both kinds of boys, that both are perfectly okay, and attune to each one of them, so each one of them can develop and potentiate properly. That often doesn't happen.
Yeah, this is so important for parents. So whether you're a child, a parent trying to figure out their child's number and how to work with them, or, you're in a relationship, what are the steps? How do you find out what you are? Do you need to see a practitioner? Can you do, I think there are some tests online where you can get some preliminary information. Tell us a little bit about how you start the exploration process.
Yeah, the journey to finding out what is my Enneagram type. So there are tests online. There's lots of them. I find the tests interesting and fun. However, I have found them not to be a great predictor of an actual Enneagram type. And there's a number of reasons for this. One is the questions can't interact with you and ask you a follow-up question. So for instance, 5 people make their bed in the morning and they're all doing it for a different reason. So the fact that I make my bed can look like a particular Enneagram type, but the reason why I did it could be very different. And the test can't get to this piece of it. The second thing is that when we take a test, we tend to be raised in a society where testing has quite an authoritative feel to it. And so if the test says, well, I'm a 6, it said I'm a 6. I don't know, it says I'm a 6. That can prevent us from doing our own deeper evaluation and deeper work. Third thing is, it takes time. It takes actually time to get beyond the externalized traits, which is the way a lot of the Enneagram popularization has gone to. Oh, you read books, you must be a 5. Oh, you like to travel, you must be a 7. Oh, you're ambitious, you must be a 3. Well, all 9 types can be ambitious. All 9 types can read books. Why? What's that mean to you? What's the value system under it? And what happens to you if you can't be ambitious, if you can't get to your book, if you can't travel and you're stuck somewhere? What happens to you tells us actually what Enneagram type you are. How you react under stress, how you adapt when you can't be your best self, what your defense system looks like. So
yeah, it's so much more, there's so many layers to it. I remember when I first had my reading with an Enneagram specialist, it went on for a couple of hours. I
Yeah.
mean, it was like looking at different cards and colors and questions and sub questions and follow-up questions. It was very, very detailed. It's very interesting because you learn a lot about yourself.
Yes, just starting the inquiry process through a test online, or and what I would highly recommend is I call them self-discovery interviews, but to work with an Enneagram specialist to just take you through an interview process, explain the 9 types, and see what resonates for you. And you can just start like that with a dialogue. That's another way to do it. Mistyping is very common. I was actually mistyped for the first year and a half that I met the Enneagram. And it's because there's certain pieces of myself I can see and that I'm adhering to. And then there's a certain part of myself.
Like,
Oh no, I don't do
that's
that.
over there.
And I tell you,
That's not me.
oh no. So I was reading these and I thought, oh yeah, that's exactly, oh no. So I'm a type 1 on the Enneagram, and type 1s are known to be judgmental and with a lot of black and white thinking. I'm like, I'm never judgmental. Well, what I didn't realize was that what I thought was factual was really judgmental. So see, the way I had oriented around kind of the way I was designed, I had no idea that actually I'm right, wrong, yes, no, that I'm splitting all the time. I didn't know I did that because it was so second nature. So it takes a while to actually see aspects of ourselves in vocabulary that people are using to describe some of these qualities or behaviors or tendencies too. But
right.
It is a little bit of a long study. And like you had mentioned earlier, we have 9 types. We have a main type. We don't change our type across our life. You have a temperament. It's like you can't go in and change your motherboard. It's not, as we all know, it's having to buy a computer. The motherboard is a motherboard, but we can actually raise our level of development, increase our capacity for awareness, be able to tolerate more presence, become far more compassionate and accepting. And we can relax the defense system so I don't have to get so reactive all the time. I can actually just kind of go, tell me more.
And improve all your relationships in life, which is so important.
To communicate, right? And articulate instead of defend and fight and argue and fly out the door or sulk or quiet, right? All things is a form of collapse too.
So if people want to reach you, we have your information on the show page, on the episode page on the site and whatnot. Suzanne, this has been just wonderful. I think we could probably talk about the Enneagram for days and still not, as you said, really, do the deep dive and learn everything about it. Thank you so much for your presence with us. And this was great information. And listeners, if you want to connect with Suzanne, listen to this podcast again, or listen to other podcasts, just go on selfpowernow.com. And there's also some free gifts there. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you, Debbie, so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Self Power Now. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with others. Follow it on your favorite podcast platform and join our community on selfpowernow.com and receive 3 free happiness gifts. And while you're there, if you're looking for more ways to be happy, healthy, peaceful, and loved, check out my books and new online courses. Until next time, this is Debbie Giassoni wishing you self-power now.